Okay, excited to be back again for the Data Value Show after the exciting mission we had last week of making data governance cool. This week we're going to be focusing on building a data foundation for AI, and we all know that that's very important. So let's get Rick Hall on the call. Rick, how you doing?
I am great, Chris. It's great to see you, and fun to talk about this topic, right?
Well, yeah, as from our previous experience, you can't get us not talking about this topic. Even though each time we bump into each other or catch up, there is a common theme to our discussion. So thank you, Rick Hall, for coming on the show. But for the audience that don't know you, would you like to give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of Cogenity, and we are a collaborative data operations platform, really meant to kind of go across all your data assets and use modern data practices and AI to help customers. And I've been in the space for 30 years, and go back to the original days of data warehousing and Inman and Kimball, and have built a couple companies on this space. So it's really interesting to see how the introduction of AI has kind of brought back the need to really think about data modeling the way we maybe did 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And yeah, everything comes full circle. I think I had Ben Rogen on the show, which he's considerably younger than me, and he was moaning about the same things happening over and over again. And I was saying, you wait to get to my age, mate. It just keeps happening. And yeah, I think the AI has triggered some positive focus on things that we've been talking about for ages: quality, good foundations, which we'll dive into in a minute. And yeah, it has some negative things as well. Is everyone thinks it's going to take our jobs away, and now everyone in the world wants to work with AI, even though they don't know what they're doing. So yeah, there's a good with the bad. But yeah, so let's start with what do you refer as data foundations?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of let's start with a little bit of what the history has been. So, as SQL and relational databases kind of been the dominant way to organize data for, since probably the 80s, right? And when that originally started, we thought about building logical models of our business separate from the physical model that instantiated that in whatever the database technology was. And there's been a lot of database technologies, and they've all kind of still used some variation of SQL. What ultimately is a foundation is the model of the business. And let's call it the foundational data. And we'll talk perhaps about process, but it's a model of the business, data, and process. And much of what has been done over the last 30 years has kind of gotten away from the logical model and the logical model tied to process. And we've been very physical in our implementation. So we have tables that are named things like cust 1, 2, 3. Most AI systems don't know what cust 1, 2, 3 is. So I think a foundational model is a model that actually is going to relate our data to business context, and that's logical. That's how I see it.
So, and it's quite interesting because obviously I think that's critical, having data model, logical models linked to business processes. In fact, I was playing around doing a bus matrix recently for a client, and yeah, you see it again. It already talked about the business process, and I think that thing's really been forgotten, and it's critical. And I know I had John Cook, who speak to him regularly, and we have chats about if you're able to use your business process to understand what data it creates or what data it uses.
Yeah,
a much better understanding of the data lifecycle, where it's needed and where it goes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So are there foundations? I think a foundation is a little bit broader than that, though. So that's probably the one of the main things that needs to be out there. But there's probably some layers underneath it, and some of that I refer to as your data ops capabilities, or your FinOps capabilities, or your your route to live, which covered by data ops, I suppose. But I think there's probably other best practices or foundational stuff which will help you enable that data modeling, which will help enable that as well. But I agree. Everything we build, or the layer we build on, is on top of the data model. So that's going to be the thing we should all focus on. I agree.
Yeah, well, I mean, your point is really well taken. We need data operations, and I think good data ops is going to kind of address data and data quality throughout its life cycle.
Yeah.
And it's probably also going to do something which I think a lot of people have kind of come to recognize is that, we built our industry originally on this idea. We have some central team, a data team, and they would create a data warehouse or a BI tool, and it would answer everybody's question in the business, right? And we've come to realize that it doesn't do that, right? That people have new questions all the time or different ways to looking at data. And so we've gotten into this world where a lot of people at the edge of the business also need to create their own analysis. We didn't have mechanisms for that. So we had the central teams building a data warehouse. We had some of those used at the edge, but we also had a lot of people pulling the data and building their own thing at the edge. Sometimes departmental BI or AI, in this kind of conflict. So, there's a structure, both physical and what are your data platforms. And I say platforms because I think most organizations don't have one, but it's also this process view that looks at data and data architecture, not as something that's completely centralized, but that realizes that we need the central capabilities and we need the capabilities on the edge, and we need collaboration between the two. So I think there's a collaborative practice, of course, something we think about a lot, that also goes with it. So there's, what's your physical infrastructure? What are your business processes? And what are your models and how are they going to work together? Right.
Yeah. And something you just mentioned, I just made a note of, was centralization versus decentralization. And the whole journey that I've been on has been this too centralized, too decentralized, too centralized, and it's like a pendulum that's swinging backwards and forwards, and it hasn't stopped and got to the balance yet, I don't think. And I think the key to a successful data initiative, data project, or a department capability within an organization is getting that balance right. And I think that's very hard to do, because
but I think one of the reasons it's hard, Chris, in my view, is that a lot of the tooling in the industry has separated, the people at the edge from the, central data team. So they work with different tools. And I think that we need to create kind of this collaborative way for them to work together to get that balance right. And, that's also key to this world, right?
I like to use the term friction. So it's we need to minimize any friction or reduce any friction to people's activities they do for their job. That means we're going to get a better outcome. So if we want to impose, you need to use a logical data model. We need to, which we should impose, and then a physical one after that's managed correctly. You need to make you can use your tool, you can use it, but this is how you need to provide us the changes to your column. We'll manage the I think I referred to this rather than software development life cycle. We'll manage the data development life cycle for you for all that schema change and everything. But you gotta be able to do this bit of it. Otherwise, we're all just going to go in different directions. We've got a question here already. So let's have a look. Would you consider mental models, conceptual models, essential for collaborative approach to stakeholders before reaching a logical model? I mean, you go first, but I've got a view on that.
Well, I mean, I think that conceptual and logical are, kind of very closely tied together, right? So you certainly need a mental model to get to, kind of a conceptual and logical model. What I would say is every organization is about creating some value.
Oh, yeah.
And that value has a set of activities that I think of as a value chain. And so when I think of the conceptual, I think I want to identify the value chain of my organization, value chains, perhaps there are many, And I want to build a conceptual view of that chain. And then I want to have a logical definition of that that becomes the foundation for what we're going to do with AI. I think that we're in kind of, I'll simplify and say the second generation of AI. And the first generation, when we were, kind of applying machine learning and statistics to data, we were using data to solve very specific problems, right? So we could kind of force fit the data to create a data set that we used to solve problem A that we understood. But with language models, now we're dealing with AI that speaks languages. It speaks database languages like SQL, and it speaks, human languages like English and other languages, right? So we have to interact with those models in this kind of language orientation. And that language orientation ultimately has to be able to speak to the underlying assets, which means it might understand what the word customer means, which is in your logical model, perhaps, but it doesn't understand what the physical name of that, which might be cust-v-x, right? And that link between logical and physical is going to get us from that customer to that cust. And if we're going to use language models, we're going to need those layers interconnected.
It's a really good point, and yeah, I fully support it. Conceptual models are it's the right model for the right audience. So you need to be talking in the right language and at the right level to other business stakeholders. Whereas when you're talking to your developers, your architects, you can move down to the another layer of complexity of that model, and you start talking about cardinality and stuff like that. Whereas you get down to the physical, you're talking about foreign keys, and you're talking about surrogate keys, and you're talking about data typing more, and and the business users don't care about that. So it's making sure you've got something that's going to help the conversation you have at each of those levels. And I have never heard I've seen lots of mental models, but I've never heard of them as mental models. So different use of the word mental. We were just talking just earlier, Rick, about the regulator I used to work on, how they used to model stuff. So I'm assuming that's a level of other conceptual model, but I might have to look that up a little later anyway. So, yeah, I think that's I think we all agree that we need better modeling. Another thought I just had is linked to, obviously we met at, we'll touch on the Winter Stage conference a little later, but we organised a conference. If anyone hadn't heard of it, Rick came along to it. But one of the presentations there was from Guy, and Guy was talking about the role of engineers and how AI will or won't take those roles away. And I think something that came out of that was, we've got an ability to do things better now, proper, and not cut corners because of time constraints that we had no option apart from to meet a client deadline, which compromise what would have been a best design for it, but that was all you could do. Now, with as you were just mentioning, using AI to go and help with generation of that DDL or generation or taking that physical model, taking that conceptual model, applying role playing to it with different concepts and different business processes to how you may have sort of conformed use of some of those objects that are in there. So I think there should be no more excuses for bad modeling and bad system design now, because we've now got some great help to help us do things properly. And that help actually helps back with AI in the end, because without if we're using that to help us drive stuff, we're going to have much better outcome when we use the AI on top of what we built.
Right. So if you look at kind of the history of technology and in all kinds of fields, what starts out as something you have to do gets built into the next level process, right? So just as when I started in the business, we were writing machine level code, right, and C code, and then we had databases that came on top of that, and we got these languages like SQL, and then tools on top of that, et cetera. But we got away from logical modeling and got into very much physical modeling. Now we want to use AI And AI is going to require logical modeling, and it's going to require logical modeling of both the data and the process and connected together. And so what I think is going to happen to our entire data community is we're going to have to move back up into this space of building these models. And yeah, some of the code will be generated, right? We won't necessarily start with a blank sheet of paper. We will rarely start with a blank screen and start writing our code. We will often start with a language model that's going to help us generate those code, but that's going to only work if we've built a model of the business. And so I think we have to be able to think about, we're going to have to move up from just being the greatest, say, SQL or Python programmer or R, to also having really good modeling skills again. And I think that's going to be key. And we have to think about what types of models. And there's a whole kind of debate, as you know, from our conversations in the Winter Data Conference, like, what kind of model should you use? Is it a traditional relational data warehouse? Is it a dimensional model? Is it a data vault? Those are all sit on relational models. There's also, these other physical things like NoSQL databases and even graph models. But those are kind of, most of the business world is really working with relational databases. And for me, the modeling approach that we want to take thinks about the value chain. And you mentioned a bus. I think that is a bus style architecture, kind of borrowing from Kimball. But that architecture, that bus model, is going to deal with the facts like order, shipment, delivery, etc. It doesn't by itself tell us the processes that connect them, right? You mentioned the inputs and the outputs. So I think our logical model has to really address both, right? Because what does AI want to do? AI wants to optimize processes. If we use AI effectively, we're going to optimize our business processes. And if our data architecture, our data foundation doesn't have any process information, then it's not going to really ever be able to do that optimization. So we are going to actually have to do both.
I agree. And I think again, a conversation I've had a few times, but business process modeling, BPM modeling normally only happens with large transformations. Like everyone goes in there and understands what's going on. They probably get out of date as soon as that project finished because no one maintains them. And it's not always, it's normally done in companies that actually have this big enough problem for them to go and do it, because it's a long task. I think there's a situation where there's what people think the business processes is, and there's what actually happens behind the scenes. So you've got you may think the onboarding process is quite simple, but then when you actually look at what happens, there's lots of manual processes that aren't documented, or someone does send something to someone else and that goes somewhere. And the difference between what is thought to be the business process to what actually is the business process, there's a chasm of difference and I think that if companies are able to measure that distance between what really happens, what you want, the size of the problem you've got. And I do think that's essential for us to understand. So if you're going to optimize your business processes, which is going to be a way of getting monetization, you can't optimize what you don't know. So I think it's really critical that we go back to basics on some of that stuff and just work out, okay, what is our business process, what data that business process need, and then you can start to look to automate it. If you start trying to automate stuff without even knowing that, you don't even know if you've succeeded. You have no way of measuring the results that you've made.
Yeah, that's where I think that, it is a big thing, right, to do. And, even just thinking about logical data models is like, okay, we're going to go back to that. And you say, oh, we're going to unify with that process model. That's more. You hear this term digital twin, right? And, it's in manufacturing and very hardcore industries, people are thinking about building digital twins, which is a representation of what is actually there, on which you can do simulations and introduce AI. And actually, I think in our business process world, we actually, if you think about unifying business process as it actually is and a logical data model, then you have the basis of what actually is a digital twin of your business. And then you can apply simulation and optimization effectively. But you have to start with the business as it exists, actually, not as you want it to exist. And I think, so you think, well, boy, that sounds like a lot. Yeah, it is a lot. But and so you think about, are we going to get rid of all the coders in the world? And is the whole data industry going to disappear? Well, I don't think so, because I think that we're going to have to work at this level and think about digital twins. And I think, or process and data. We don't have to call it a digital twin. I'm starting to think of it that way. And then we'll be able to use AI there. And I thought, I remember the conversation in Texas, right? And you had this whole discussion, this debate, like, is this going to be a dystopian future where there are no more data engineers? We're going to be like Detroit in the US after the collapse of the auto industry, right? And everybody's going to be out of a job. Or is it going to be some bright future where AI saves the world? It's probably in the middle. There are going to be some good and bad usages, but the people who can understand business and business process and the foundations of modeling, not just how to code great in Python or SQL or any other language, those are the people who are able to make that leap and bridge that gap.
Totally. And I've just been thinking here about I've seen these graphs of, like, the top 10 companies of the world and how it's changed over time. Like the General Electrics of the world have come further back down, and the Amazons have come back up. I think we're going to have a situation of another level of disruption here, because for companies to go and implement a digital twin in a large scale company now, to go and get that to start, well, to reverse engineer what you're doing around, is just going to take ages and ages and ages, and it probably won't be a success. Or maybe you'll have little successes on that journey, but the overall one, to have a digital twin of your whole company will be an even larger challenge. So these newer companies that are coming, what we call disruption, challengers, the ones that have people now that have seen what the cloud brought us, seeing what all the SaaS products have brought us, thinking, right, okay, I can do this a bit better now. I don't need all that bloat that's already there. I'm going to start the digital twin straight away and build up from that, and that's going to be our foundation. We're not going to have, and we'll always be doing A/B testing on every single thing we do to be the most efficient at what we do, and even continuously doing this is a not a one-off exercise, it's a continuous exercise.
Yeah, I think it is. And, I'm not smart enough to say who's going to win and who's going to lose and how much of the old co's are going to lose. And, if I was, by the way, I'd just be on a beach collecting money from my investments, right? But but I will say that it is a journey, right? So, kind of, if you want to use AI in your business, okay, you need to think about, okay, what's my physical infrastructure? What's my business process, and how do I create collaboration between my teams? And then, start to think about how I'm going to build modeling in, right? So, when language models first came on the scene, it's like, they're going to take over, and we're going to have business people just asking questions and getting answers, or even being advised by, by these intelligent agents. Well, the foundation, it's not going to happen all over at once, but you can do it in pieces, right? So the first piece is you have a physical infrastructure, attaching context to it, and putting that context into the chain and definitions of your business. That's not an overwhelming exercise. You can do it in a piece, in a particular value area, and then language models can start producing answers, or at least code that actually talks to your business, right? So I have an example, right? So, last year I had a project for a company that was spinning out of another big manufacturer, and they had to put in a whole set of systems, new systems. And one of the things they needed was a data strategy. So they brought us in to, define and implement the data strategy. And the people at the top of the business said, hey, one of the most important things for us is we need to understand and optimize, our sales process. So, we need the Salesforce, which is what they were using, data. And we want you to, hey, that should be really easy to bring it over and start to do some optimization around it, right? And so, we defined an architecture. And, one of the central tables in Salesforce is the opportunity table, right? And that kind of tells you about an activity from beginning to end. Well, when we looked at the opportunity table had 250 columns, of which 4 of them were purchase order, P-O, purchase ord, et cetera, named differently, used as they modified their system over time by different things. And there's no definition of the business rules. And then there's also different business calculations, right? So there's just this whole forensic audit process, right, of getting that opportunity model to a logical model that then they could ask questions about. So I think that, if you know what business process you're interested in, and okay, you have a conceptual view of that, you're going to have to link whatever your physical data structure is to a logical definition with the business rules, and then you can apply optimization in AI.
Yep, I agree. Got another message from Dan, and yeah, thank you, Dan, for clarifying something for me. He got a question there for you on the second part of it, so do you want to just absorb that? Yeah, keep the question coming.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I think when you say, I think what Dan means when he says process mining is really kind of trying to understand the business process by actually using the data from that process to define what it is. And absolutely, right? The fastest way the more digital your process is, the more you can reverse engineer that process model from the existing world. And that, I think, is what process mining is going to do. And it's going to be the basis of what I call the digital twin, right?
I again, back to my conversation with John Cook, and this is something we've been talking about a little while ago, was, if you were able to put like agents in every single one of your connections, every single one of your databases, every single one of your applications layers, like you did for like things like Datadog and Instana, which were like monitoring your infrastructure, but they're just like little bits of snippet of code. If you're able to see what data is being created, passed, and what is linked to, yeah, you can. But you can mine that processes to come up and then understand what's really happening, as opposed to what you think's happening. But I haven't seen anyone nail it yet. I'll be keen to look into anyone that's anyone out there that's nailed process mining and got some tooling doing that. Let me know. I'll be interested to see what it's about.
Yeah.
Let's go back.
Remember when we were doing these transformational exercises a decade ago, we were actually, defining what that value chain business process was. It's not undoable. And that's really, kind of the basis of doing this well, right? And you have this whole topic of design thinking that was a big deal, a few years ago. And then the basis of design thinking is to map out your current process. You get your current process and your data for a value chain or even a subset of a value chain and start there.
Yeah, definitely. So we touched earlier on different like modeling techniques. So what are alternatives now to storing our data for AI to get more context out of it?
Well, so, first of all, we have this kind of data lake house and data warehouse, which is a kind of how are you going to do it physically, right? And I think that the advantage to kind of a lake house, and particularly one based on open table formats, is probably physically the right way to approach this because you're most open to change, right? So much of the industry has been like, just use my tool and then everything will be great. And then the next generation is use my tool in this kind of lake house open table at the physical level is a great way to go. And you say, logically, how do I model it, right? And I think within this world of relational data architectures, there are kind of three models that people talk the most about, right? There's the classic relational data warehouse, which is based very much on core relational algebra. And then you have kind of the dimensional data warehouse, and the dimensional model, and the bus architecture, which goes with the dimensional model, and then you have the data vault, right? Personally, I'm a biggest fan of the dimensional data model, the dimensional bus architecture, because the bus, kind of represents a value chain. We're trying to optimize their value chains. The core relational data warehouse was great as a foundation of understanding how all your data might work together transactionally, but it's really going to ultimately be the value chain that we need to think about. And I'm personally not a big fan of the vault, right? It's kind of come along to create a way to handle change data, in a standard way. And the problem with the vault is it's not really necessarily based on relational math, which both relational and the dimensional model are, and it's hard to get data in and out. So, kind of you have to write all this stuff to do that, right? If you start with a data, let's call it a lake house, which is going to bring all your data in as granular level, and you think about a bus architecture for analytics, which is based on a kind of a Kimball style view, in my mind, that's the way that you should be thinking about this. And you tie that bus to a process model, and you do that in a conceptual way, and you've got a really strong foundation for AI. Now, there's another piece to it, which I think you mentioned right at the very beginning, which is data quality, right? So, it's one thing to have this kind of architecture. It's another thing to ask yourself, do I have quality data into that model? And, your original point about data operations, well, we do need to take from the software engineering world this view of testing at each stage, right? Kind of too much of what we have done with data is waited till the end to test it. We need to test it at the source. We need to test it at each step in the process, because if we don't have, quality data, it doesn't matter. Even if we have a good logical representation, AI is not going to make sense of it.
No, totally agree. And I think, well, I've got a few notes I made there. Data quality, and I've seen a couple of approaches to data quality. Like if it doesn't match the quality, it just gets rejected straight away. And I think that approach, you're probably not understanding the use cases for that data, because not every quality issue means that data can't be used. And it's just understanding back to business processes, back to use cases. If you actually understand that this business process requires these attributes, and those attributes need to be on this level of quality, fine. And then you won't you can then let that data go through for that business process, but you may not let it go through the business process that was going for a marketing campaign, because the address information or the email information hadn't been validated, or it had lots of duplicates in there, or it had some things that you didn't think were they're all email addresses from a location you weren't expecting or something. So it's understanding what's the right quality rules for the right use cases to get that through. Again, just keep going back down to business processes. And the other thing, while we're talking about, I won't repeat all the comments that were made at Wednesday conference about Data Vault, but I'll comment on. It came around, in that Hadoop era initially, to solve some problems with the distributed architecture, and those hash keys allowed you to move that to be pushed through. And I remember having conversations with Ken Graziano, the first days of Snowflake, when we were actually working at a supermarket. He was on the sell side, I was on the buying side then, and he was saying, well, how Snowflake's architecture works, hash keys are useless for them, because it doesn't help with your high watermark, low watermark, or the system tables for partition pruning. So it wasn't. Yeah. So immediately you've got something that's been designed to solve a problem for a technology-driven problem, not a business problem, and enforcing that onto people using it, and then another technology comes along, and it's not as relevant for that. So yeah, I think whatever we do, we really need to have a modeling approach that's business focused. It's actually solving the business problem, because technology problems get solved quicker than the technology problems come and go. Yeah.
The technology is changing, a lot, right? Continues to, right? But, I think every organization's got a value chain. They're always going to. And I think if you can represent that value chain, you can start to think about how you're going to improve it. And I think that is a both data and process, kind of view, right? So I think the dimensional model is still the foundational way to get at this.
I agree.
I also think that, we add analytics on top of kind of that core model. And that's where, kind of this collaborative approach is so critical, because there's not just one question that has to be asked of data, right? So, I actually think that, we've started to talk about data products a lot in the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that the basics of that, kind of value chain model is granular data at that basis. And then I think we have to have the ability to have analytic content on top of that. And that analytic content has to be broken into pieces so we can add it together, so people can contribute those definitions
Yeah.
in a way that's going to help the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Two data products and analytics metadata. I just made a note there. But before I go with that, I'm just going to go back to something you were talking about earlier, which was about the open source storage types, or having a lake house with open source storage. And something I'm seeing at the moment, and I think I've joked about it, storage wars. This is not the storage wars of maybe that program where you go and find a locker and you find out what's in it. No, this is storage wars of do you go X table? Do you go Iceberg? Do you go with Delta tables? Do you go with Huddle? There's a few out there now, and the challenge is not everything all works together with them all. So I mean, we've been doing stuff like Databricks will support certain things in certain circumstances with certain formats. Snowflake will support certain things with certain things, and with the tagging part of it, or your security meta. So there's until the vendors stop this vendor war piece and think about, okay, the customer is the customer. If we supply them whatever storage that they want, that we can then not restrict the features that are on it where possible, then I think the best service will win, rather than trying to steer people down to lock into a particular format.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's, kind of, look, vendors have wanted lock-in for, years, right? Because vendors want you to be committed to their tool and committed to it forever, right? And for a long time, they've been saying, just move all your data from your old tech to my tech, and, we'll solve all your problems. And, big organizations that we deal with, they don't just have one data platform. They might have, like, we have a big retailer we're working with in the US, and, they've got Teradata, they've got a Hadoop database, Hive-based, they've got Netezza, they're moving to BigQuery, they bought some company that had Snowflake, and, and a bunch of other stuff, right? And I think that we're not going to get all the data in one place.
Right.
So the next thing you do, I would say, do it with an open format. But all of these things talk SQL. They have little dialect differences, but they all talk SQL. We have the view that you should be thinking logically above the data platform, because you don't have one in most cases. And if you build your logic to think about SQL and to think above the platform, then you're able to talk to multiple platforms. And and if those platforms give you an open table format, then you can bring different processing to that data. And there are storage wars. I tend to think Iceberg is winning and is likely to win. But vendors will continue to try to tweak things to make their version better, the same way they have with SQL, right? So SQL that Snowflake speaks is a different dialect than SQL that BigQuery speaks, right? But it's translating between them is not that hard to do, right? And I think that there'll be a certain amount of that at the table, open table level.
Yeah, we've got a question from George, who you probably remember from the Winter Conference. So, what do you mean by a business-focused modeling process look like? Oh, business. Yeah, well, I think you know what I mean. Business-focused modeling process look like.
So I think you use that term, but the way I would think of it is, it means take your biggest problems and start there, right? I used to say, look, take the P&L of your organization, find the big numbers, right?
Yeah.
Big cost, big revenue, start there, right? Because those are where your biggest opportunity is, hit the big numbers. But it basically means, I think what you probably meant when you said that is,
I didn't realize I didn't use it.
And address those problems as opposed to getting caught up in some ideal modeling.
Yeah,
world.
and yeah, you're right. For the thing I said, I agree. I didn't realize I'd said it and not yourself there. I think it's understanding what's the biggest pain of your business at the moment and looking to model that process. It could be the pain, or it could be the cost. If you're looking to optimize something, and what's it cost us to onboard a customer at the moment, and how accurate is it? Okay, that's our low hanging fruit that we know that's got the biggest loss on it, or the biggest cost on it, or the biggest complication. Let's go and have a focus on that, because you're driving it off a customer onboarding. You know what you're doing. So
I would also say related to that is where we've done so much of the history. We in the data community, and I've been down this road. We've said, okay, we're going to build the new data warehouse, and then we're going to solve your business problems. And so, just move the data to my platform, and then I'll come after your problems, right? And that move the data to my platform is a really time-consuming and expensive exercise.
Yeah.
And probably business process prioritization says, I'm going to start with my business problem. I'm not going to move the data unless I have to, and I'm going to try to use the data to solve my problem. This is where not being tied to tooling that's tied to a technology is so important. Of course, that's where we sit in Cogenity, so that's our point of view. But the point is, work incrementally, right? So, what is it? The average life expectancy of a CDAO? 18 months.
18 months, I say, yeah. Till they're put down.
Yeah, and so what are these big data projects?
Sorry.
It's the life of a big data project. 18 months, 2 years, longer, right? So, if you're the data team and you're proposing some big initiative that's going to take, multiple years, well, your business team is likely to get tired of that, and you're going to wonder why you're out the door. So, taking the business priorities and using the data where it is, I think, key to getting results and going from there.
Yeah, and it's all about getting that buy-in from the business and the trust for the business, and being able to start with something and deliver that on time or early, and actually show that evidence of this is what we're able to do. It's just gonna help you on that longer, more challenging project or task that you may have to pick up. I'm going to go back to the conversation that we had back in Texas when I was talking to Matthew and yourself, and knowing what your product does a bit, and knowing some of the real world problems out there with those large scale migrations. So you could have your data in multiple locations at the moment as part of that centralization of bringing your data to one place. I refer to it as data gravity. Bring all data sets that are commonly used together to one location. It's becoming less relevant now with some of the iceberg stuff. So it's easy, as long as it's close enough to it, you can still achieve what you want. But it's that pointing of the query or pointing of the request, that data, to the location that you want it to use now. So having thousands of tables out there, but gradually you want to like move that stuff across, and then retire some of the old jobs that are doing these things. Not pay for that storage twice. Not pay for the compute of maintaining those objects twice. Not creating more confusion of people not knowing where to go. So you're doing something quite neat of actually routing the query to where that data was the golden copy, let's call it that term. So do you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. Kind of, I think the real world is data is in multiple places, right? And the classic view of vendors has been to tie the language and the query to the data, right? So if you move the data, you have to rewrite the query, right? So we've moved the query, the logic, a layer above where the data actually sits. So you can have the data on, maybe it's on Netezza today, and you're moving from Netezza to BigQuery, right? If your logic is not tied to Netezza, it's SQL, then you can apply it to Netezza today and also generate it for BigQuery tomorrow. And if when you implement BigQuery, you're implementing, say, iceberg tables under the hood, then not only can you query that data through BigQuery itself, but what we say is, look, you got a laptop, probably. Your laptop has a whole lot of power. The power what used to be a mini computer, maybe in a mainframe. Most of your queries are not huge. Use the local processing, bypass the cost of compute on these platforms, and hit these open tables directly. So, our general view is create a catalog of reusable objects, logic that sits above your platform. Do that in a collaborative way between data engineers and people at the edge, so you don't have this war between the two. And then be able to talk to multiple platforms. And when we talk to 18 in a very native way, and through a generic SQL driver to several hundred others, right? So it doesn't matter where your data is. You can develop logic that will talk to it. And you don't have to be forced to, do the conversion before you get value. I just think you have to get to value, from the outset. And that is going to come from removing the logic from the processing engine and the underlying data. You really actually have three things there. People have talked about two: storage layer and processing layer. Snowflake got that going early, right? But they still had all their logic into the Snowflake tools, right? Because they wanted to process it all. But I think you want to put your logic above your processing layer, above your data layer. That way you have the most flexibility, to address change. And you're not forced to start with a migration. If the first thing you have to do to solve a business problem is migrate the data, then not only do you have to migrate the data, you have to redo the logic because it's probably tied to that source. And that's a big exercise, and one that businesses are increasingly not willing to wait, right?
They've heard it all before. Oh, well, hold on. We told me that when I moved that Hadoop cluster to this one. Oh, now you told me when I moved it from Redshift to this place. Oh, now when's it going to end? And they've just lost the will to live on. And as soon as anyone hears the word, oh, we've got to migrate that data. Oh God, I might as well go home then.
Yeah. And those logical models, of course, are completely they're not tied to a particular data platform. So you start thinking logical models and the use of AI, and that gets your business process, business thinking above the platform, I think you're on the right track. And so, we tend to we sometimes say one door to data means you get to data wherever it is, and introduce both the physical and its map to the logical into your AI tools. Because, your AI tools, the language models can produce code, queries, effectively, but they're not going to hit the 4 different terms for purchase order, right? They're not going to know what those terms are and what the business rules are. You're going to have to, define that context, and then it can be available. And don't make that context definition physically tied to just one platform. That's kind of how I see it, how we see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. There's a lot. We're getting close. We've got a couple more topics maybe, but we talked about data products and then analytics metadata earlier, and I think we can just touch on the fact that again at Winter Data Conference I asked one question to a panel, which was, "What's a data product?" And we didn't have anyone. The 6 people on the panel came up with 6 different answers, and one of the panelists said that they asked the same question and they got 14 different answers to another group. So there was commonality between them all, but there was no one nailed it as well. I think the conclusion that was data product is whatever it works for yourself within your company. It was the conclusion. But the other thing we mentioned was analytics metadata. So where do you see that fitting into into the platform, and how should it be managed?
Well, I think that that metadata is really your contextual or logical definition of what the data is, right? So it's if you're going to build a physical model, you want your language model to talk to it. You need the metadata, the contextual information, in order for the language model to be useful. So you can do that directly into these context windows of these language models. You can ingest a physical schema, and you can ingest a logical definition, or call it the metadata about that, right? And that's what we do. We ingest both physical definition and the logical definitions. And I would say, to your data product thing, all a data product is data that's been governed for value to solve a problem. What I would also say is that you should always build a granular data product layer, which is data at its most basic level, because the one thing we know about data and about data architectures is that we don't know all the use cases for the data up front, right? So we need a granular set of data that's of high quality, right? And it's got clear and effective naming. That you do that at the granular level, and then you can build components on top of it. And you have to govern those components, right? What makes them data products is that they're governed.
Yeah.
That governing says that this data is fit for use, right? It's got a certain level of quality that I don't have to wonder if that quality is actually built into the process.
It's consumable, and it tastes nice. That's a good.
Not to make you sick, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're approaching. We're getting towards the end. I think a little bit of a. Well, first of all, if anyone wants to catch up with you, where are you going to be going next?
Yeah. So I mean, a couple of things, right? So first of all, the company is cogenity.co, co, not .com. And that's Cogenity with an I. So, and you can find us on the web, and you can we have an individual user, easy to download tool, but our main business is around this collaborative capability, which is our team and our enterprise tooling. They can find me on LinkedIn. It's Richard Hall, Cogenity. That's an easy way to find me, and happy to chat about modeling and how we go about it. It's easy to to trial our stuff as well.
And as I'll put the history. So Rick traveled all the way from Colorado that had loads of snow to the Winter Data Conference we organized in Oslo that had very little snow. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Rick for going all that way. So I'm sure, and you said that it was worth it from the content that was there, but not for the skiing.
Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you what was great about skiing is the time to chat with people, right? Which is awesome, right? Yeah. So, you know, we probably have better snow this year, but you know, what's interesting about, you know, our business probably today is, you know, the majority of it is certainly the US, and we have a business in Europe, and it's growing. And it's a chance to meet with people like yourself and the other members of the European community. And what it's really encouraging, you know, is maybe European organizations are not so focused on, you know, the next whiz bang technology, and they want to use resources effectively and efficiently. And so it's actually a message that works really well with our stuff, right? Which says, hey, you know, work with your data, you know, kind of where it is, and then, you know, evolve over time. And I think that, you know, in that logical modeling world, you do also have to think about data compatibility. And there's a
Yep.
whole thing about data compatibility standards, which link data, and we can talk about that as well. But that's a future conversation. So tomorrow we're hosting our own
Oh, wow.
webinar.
Yeah.
It's actually on this concept of one door to data and how do you get across data. We've got another session coming up probably a month from now that's going to be about data compatibility and how do you integrate data across sources, right? So, you know, it's
Brilliant.
kind of a lot of discussion, but it's great to talk to you, Chris. You guys are doing some really exciting things. And you know, the more that we find people of like mind who, you know, kind of the data community is a cool community because we're, you know, increasingly thinking about business problems, not technology architecture. And that's where we should be focused, right?
Definitely, definitely. So, and I think we first met at Day Texas. So, if you want to put some things on your calendar for like Day Texas January, I think that's where you should always. Or you'll find me, you'll find Richard, and loads of other people. And obviously, Winter Data Conference. You know, follow the page. You'll get the latest updates. It looks like I have to again next year because it was so good. I was hoping it'd be the last one because it's a lot of effort, but. Afterwards, I enjoyed it so much, I thought I had to do it again as well.
We got to get one going here in the US, right?
That's someone else organised. I want to just be an attendee. I'll give you my playbook of how to run it and everything. But
deal,
which is evolving. So this week, anyone in London, we have our meetup on Wednesday. So it's at the normal place, the Q Bar, Tabernacle Street. So you'll find all the usual suspects down there if you're in town. Hopefully to catch up with you. I don't know who's on the show next week. I can't remember, but I think we have a show next week, so tune in for that. I'll get an update on that. Cool. I mean, we'll probably call that a wrap. I've flown on the red eye from last night, and I've got I'm behind on lots of things. So I need to crack on with some stuff. But Rick, thank you very much for coming on the show. Always enjoy our conversations. We weren't short of anything to talk about. So thanks again, and stick in the comments of the show your events coming up. So if anyone wants to, they'll be able to find them there and register for them.
That's great. I'll do so. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, and look forward to keeping this conversation alive.
Definitely. Till next time. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Rick. All right.
Yeah.
We'll call that a wrap. Thanks, Ed. Till next week.